I didn't drive 4 hours to eat catered shrimp or smile at people who'd spent a decade pretending I didn't exist. I drove 4 hours because my mother said it in front of 30 people, the way she always delivered her sharpest cruelties lightly, offhandedly, like she was commenting on the weather outside. "She works for the government," my mother announced when someone at the party asked what I did. She waved her hand once. "Paper pushing. You know how it is with certain people, they never quite figure out the real world." Polite laughter scattered across the room. My father studied the label on his beer bottle like it contained instructions. My brother Derek stood near the makeshift bar with his fiancée, smiling at something she'd said, not hearing any of it. But across the room, Derek's business partner, a man I had never personally met, went the color of old chalk the moment he looked past my mother and saw the lanyard around my neck. He wasn't looking at my mother. He was looking at my name. You can't understand that moment without understanding what they built first, and what they tore down to build it. I was 17 when I watched my parents decide which child was worth investing in. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in a single conversation. It happened the way most injustices happen inside families, through accumulation, through patterns so familiar they start to feel like weather, just the way things are. My father ran a small tile and flooring business out of our garage in Dayton, Ohio. My mother managed the books and also managed every narrative about our family, with a precision she never applied to anything else. We weren't poor. We weren't rich either. We lived in the specific American middle where there was always enough, just never for everything. Derek was 3 years younger than me, and had inherited my father's gift for making a room feel warmer by walking into it. He was social in a way I was not, easy in a way I was not, and my mother loved him in a way that required no restraint, no conditions, no explanation. I knew this the way children always know things they're not supposed to know yet. In the texture of a morning, in who got asked about their day first and who got asked whether the dishes were done. I didn't hate my brother for it. I want to be clear about that. Derek was not the architect of anything. He was just the beneficiary. There's a difference, and it took me years to stop confusing the two. When I was a senior in high school, I did everything they told me to do. I kept my grades up. I applied to 3 universities, got into 2, and chose the one 40 minutes away because I thought proximity might feel like consideration. I filled out the financial aid forms and left the parent income section for my mother to complete. I waited. I stayed quiet in the way I'd learned staying quiet was the safest translation of hope. The night I brought the tuition breakdown to the kitchen table, my father was watching a game. My mother was cleaning the stovetop with the focused energy she saved for tasks she could finish. I laid the paper down between them. I said I needed about $8,000 for the first semester after my aid package was applied. I said it plainly. I'd rehearsed being calm. My mother didn't look up from the stovetop. "We can't do that right now," she said. The business had a slow quarter. My father muted the game but didn't turn it off. "You could do community college first," he offered. "Transfer after 2 years. Lots of people do it that way." I was accepted to a 4-year program, I said. "Lots of people take loans," my mother said. "I have loans. I still need $8,000. My father turned the game back on. Not loudly, just back on. I sat with it. That specific silence, the kind that means the conversation is over not because it was resolved but because they decided it was. I folded the paper and went to my room and lay on my bed staring at a water stain on the ceiling I'd memorized over 17 years and understood something so clearly it almost felt like peace. I was going to have to figure this out without them, which meant I was going to have to figure out how not to need them, which was going to take longer than one night. 3 months later, my father announced he was backing Derek's idea to start a small landscaping and outdoor contracting company. Derek was 15. The company wasn't going to start for years, but there was a business account opened. There was talk about a trailer for equipment. There was a weekend trip to look at commercial mowers that my father described at dinner with the animated enthusiasm he'd never once brought to my college search. My mother passed the rolls and said Derek had a natural instinct for business. My father agreed. Derek looked pleased and slightly embarrassed, the way good-natured people look when they're getting exactly what they want. I ate my dinner. I said congratulations. I cleared my plate. I enrolled in September using every dollar of my aid package, 2 private loans I co-signed alone, and wages from a job at a hotel front desk that I'd start 3 days after move-in. I did not tell my parents how I managed it. They did not ask. The next 4 years were not cinematic, they were administrative. They were spreadsheets and overnight shifts, and the specific fatigue of a person carrying everything with no slack in the rope. I graduated with a degree in finance and a GPA I was quietly proud of, and an amount of student debt that felt like a physical object I carried in my chest. I attended my own graduation with a friend from my accounting cohort because my mother said they had a conflict, and my father said it was a long drive and Derek had a soccer tournament. I drove back to my apartment afterward and ate leftover pad thai and applied for jobs online until midnight. That was my graduation party. I wasn't bitter about it anymore by then. Bitterness requires ongoing surprise. I had stopped being surprised. The job I eventually got was not glamorous. It was an entry-level analyst position at a regional field office connected to the Small Business Administration's Office of Inspector General. It was government work, which meant paperwork and procedure and a starting salary that required a calculator to feel real. It also meant something I hadn't had in 4 years: rules that applied to everyone equally. That was the part nobody tells you about government compliance work. People assume it's dry, and parts of it are, but what it actually is, at its foundation, is a system where the outcome can't be adjusted based on who your parents know or which child they decided to love more. Documentation is documentation. A flag discrepancy is a flag discrepancy regardless of how charming you are at dinner parties. I was good at it almost immediately. Not because I was brilliant, though I worked hard enough to approximate it, but because I had spent my entire childhood learning to read the gap between what people said and what the paperwork actually showed. I had been trained for this work by my own family without anyone intending it. Over 7 years, I moved from analyst to reviewer to senior examiner. My caseload involved federal loan applications, grant disbursements, fraud referrals. I developed a reputation for being thorough without being theatrical. My supervisor, a woman named Patricia who had worked federal oversight for 20 years, once described me in a performance review as the kind of person who catches things without announcing she's looking. I kept that review in a folder I returned to occasionally. My parents called during those years the way they'd always called rarely, and most often when the call was functionally a request. My mother once asked if I could help with a tax question. My father once called to see if I knew anything about small business grant applications, which I found interesting. I gave him the public website information and nothing more. He thanked me with the slight deflation of someone who'd expected a shortcut. Derek and I stayed loosely in touch. He was easier to talk to than either of our parents, which is its own kind of damning. He'd grown his landscaping company into something real residential and commercial clients, 6 employees, a small fleet of trucks with a logo my mother had apparently helped design. He was proud of it. I respected the work genuinely. What I didn't know, until a Tuesday morning 7 months before that party, was that Derek had applied for a federal small business expansion loan routed through our regional review office. I was in the middle of my second coffee when I opened the queue and saw the application. Derek's full name, his company, our parents listed as co-applicants on the collateral documentation, the family address I'd grown up in, listed as an asset. I sat very still for about 45 seconds. Then I pulled the full file. The application was for a significant loan enough to expand operations into commercial landscaping contracts that required bonding and equipment financing. The numbers were largely in order. Derek's business had real revenue, real employees, a real track record. On its surface, the application was straightforward. But there was a discrepancy in the co-applicant documentation. My parents had listed their income and asset profile in a way that did not align with records our office had access to through cross-referencing. The gap wasn't enormous, but it was deliberate-looking. The kind of discrepancy that doesn't happen by accident. The kind that happens when someone adjusts numbers to make an application look stronger than it is. I read it twice. I drank my coffee, and then I did what I was required to do, which was also the only thing that let me sleep at night. I sent a formal recusal notice to my supervisor, documenting my family relationship to the applicant, requesting immediate reassignment of the file to a colleague with no conflict, and flagging the income discrepancy as a concern for the new reviewer's attention. Patricia handled it without drama, the way experienced people handle things. She thanked me for the disclosure, reassigned the file the same afternoon, and told me the discrepancy would be reviewed as a standard part of the process. She didn't ask me what I thought should happen. That wasn't how the work functioned. I was no longer involved. What I did not do was call my brother. What I did not do was call my parents. What I did not do was warn anyone. 2 weeks later, the party invitation arrived in my email. Derek's fiancée had sent it a warm, genuine message saying they'd love for family to come celebrate the company's 7th anniversary and their engagement. She didn't know we barely spoke. She was simply a kind person, extending a kind invitation. I RSVP'd yes after thinking about it for 3 days. I told myself it was about Derek. And partly it was. But I had also spent 7 years building something and never once standing in a room where my parents had to see it. I was not above being human about that. I arrived in dress clothes rather than anything that announced my position, but I kept my work ID on its lanyard out of habit I'd carried since my first year on the job. Old routine. You stop noticing it after a while. The party was at Derek's shop, an open garage space strung with market lights and folding tables and catered food that was better than the venue suggested. People milled around holding drinks. Derek's employees stood in a loose group near the coolers. My mother was stationed near the entrance like a stage manager. She saw me before I reached her. Her expression didn't change toward warmth. "You came," she said. I said I would. She looked me over the way she'd always looked me over, not taking me in, just assessing. My father appeared from somewhere behind her, older, softer around the edges, his handshake too firm in the way of men who've learned to compensate. "Good to see you," he said, and it was almost believable. Derek found me 20 minutes later and hugged me in the uncomplicated way he'd always had. His fiancée, a woman named Rachel with an easy laugh and no apparent awareness of our family's architecture, handed me a drink and asked about my work with genuine curiosity. I gave her the abbreviated version: Federal Examiner, Business Loan Compliance, Regional Oversight. She nodded like it sounded interesting, which I appreciated. My mother was nearby. I saw her absorb those words and file them somewhere dismissible. The pivot came when a neighbor of my parents, someone I recognized faintly from childhood, a woman with silver hair and the tone of someone accustomed to being the most interested person in every room, asked my mother what I did for work now. She'd missed the introduction. My mother smiled, set her drink down. "She works for the government," she said, loud enough to carry. "Paper pushing, you know. They always need people for that kind of thing." A small, practiced laugh. "Not everyone figures out the real world." Someone chuckled. My father stared at the floor. And across the room, a man I recognized from Derek's company website, Marcus Hale, co-investor and operations manager, turned toward the laughter, tracked it back to my mother, and then looked at me. His face didn't just pale. Something left it entirely. He knew the name on my badge from a cover letter attached to Derek's file, or perhaps from the recusal memo my office had generated, which would have listed my name as the original assigned reviewer. Either way, he understood in seconds what my mother had just publicly called paper pushing. Derek noticed Marcus first. He followed his partner's gaze toward me, then toward my lanyard, then back toward Marcus's expression, and the math started happening behind his eyes. My mother, oblivious, continued her conversation. Marcus excused himself from the group he was standing with and crossed the room quickly. He didn't approach me directly. He went to Derek first, leaned close, and said something I couldn't hear. Derek listened. His face changed. Then Derek looked at me, not with anger, with the specific confusion of someone recalculating everything at once. He walked toward me slowly. "Can we talk somewhere quiet?" We moved to Derek's office off the main garage space. Small room, cluttered desk, a whiteboard covered in scheduling grids. Rachel started to follow. Derek touched her arm gently and shook his head. She read it and stayed. Marcus followed us in. My parents appeared at the office door a minute later, my mother having sensed the current of the room without knowing its source. My father just looked tired. Derek closed the door. He looked at me. "Marcus says your name was on our loan application." "My name was on it as original reviewer," I said. I removed myself from the case the day I saw it. I disclosed the relationship and flagged the file for reassignment. Derek absorbed this. "You didn't call me. That would have been a conflict." Marcus stood near the wall, still pale, recalibrating. "So you're not on the review anymore?" "No. I have no involvement in the decision." My mother crossed her arms. "What decision? Someone explain what's happening." "I work in loan compliance oversight," I said, keeping my voice even. Derek's application was routed through my office. I can't review family members' applications. Standard protocol. I recused myself. My mother stared at me. So you have nothing to do with it. Correct. Then why does this feel like a scene you staged? Because, I said, you told 30 people my career was paper pushing. She opened her mouth. Closed it. My father said quietly, let's not do this here. I agree, I said. But I didn't start it. Derek pulled a chair away from the desk and sat down. He ran a hand over his face with the slow movement of someone who needs a moment before speaking. Marcus stayed against the wall, and I noticed he wasn't looking at me the way people look at someone they're afraid of. He was looking at me the way people look at something they've underestimated. The application, Derek said carefully. Is there a problem with it? I measured my words. I flagged a discrepancy in the co-applicant documentation before I recused. My colleague is reviewing it as part of standard process. I can't tell you anything beyond that. The room went still. My mother said sharply, what kind of discrepancy? That's between the applicant and the reviewer. We're your family. You're also co-applicants on a federal loan. Those are different categories in my work. My father straightened. He looked at my mother, and something passed between them, a specific kind of silence I recognized from childhood. The silence of people who share a secret and have just been reminded it exists. Derek saw it too. He'd lived in the same house. He knew the frequency. Dad, he said, what did you put on that application? Standard information, my father said. Too quickly. The income figures, my mother said, pivoting to the tone she used when she needed to manage a narrative. We may have estimated slightly generously. You know how these forms are, there's always interpretation involved. Marcus made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Mom, Derek said. It helps your application look stronger, she said. Parents do it. Everyone does it. Federal loan fraud, I said, not unkindly, is a category that doesn't have an interpretation exception. My mother's composure cracked at the edges. You are not going to sit there and use that word. I didn't choose the word. The statute did. This is your brother's business. Her voice rose. 7 years of his life. You would jeopardize that because of some form? I let that sit for a moment. Let everyone in the room feel the shape of it. Then I said, I removed myself from his case the same day I found it. I protected his review from any appearance of bias in either direction. His application is being evaluated by someone who has never met any of us. Derek looked at me slowly. Whether it succeeds or fails, I continued, will be based entirely on what's actually in it. Another silence. This one had a different texture. Derek asked quietly, why didn't you just call me? Warn me at least. I had thought about this question. Had turned it over on the 4-hour drive. Because, I said, I didn't want you to spend the last 7 months wondering if your loan approval depended on whether I liked you. And I didn't want our parents telling you that your outcome was in my hands. Because it isn't. It was never supposed to be. Derek's throat worked. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. My mother tried again. So there's nothing you can do. There's nothing I should do, I said. Those aren't the same thing. But I need you to understand that I've chosen them to be. She stared at me with the expression she'd worn my entire childhood, the one that said she didn't know what to do with me, and found that my fault. My father spoke for the first time in several minutes. His voice was lower than I expected, stripped of the rehearsed quality he usually carried. How long have you been doing this work? 7 years. And you're good at it. Yes, he nodded once. Slowly. Not with pride, I want to be accurate about that. With something closer to recognition arriving too late to be useful, settling on his face like sediment. My mother opened her mouth. Derek looked at her. Don't, he said. She closed it. Derek stood up. He looked at Marcus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then he looked at me with the expression of someone reassembling a picture they thought they'd understood. I didn't know you were doing this, he said. Any of it. I didn't know you'd been in that office. I know. Mom said you had a government job. She made it sound like... He stopped. I know what it sounded like, I said. He exhaled. I'm sorry. You didn't say it. No, but I didn't ask either. For 7 years, I didn't ask what you were actually doing. He paused. I think I was easier not knowing. That was probably the most honest thing my brother had said to me since we were teenagers arguing over the television remote. I didn't have a clean response for it. I just nodded. My mother was very still now. Whatever argument she'd been loading had dissolved somewhere in the last few minutes, and what was left looked unexpectedly like a person rather than a position. "You came anyway," she said finally. Not to the room, to me specifically. "Rachel invited me. But you came." I looked at her. "I always came when you asked. You just stopped asking." The market lights outside the office window threw soft shapes across the floor. We could hear the party continuing without us, someone laughing loudly, music at a civilized volume, the sound of a celebration that had no idea it was sharing a building with a reckoning. My father set his drink on the corner of Derek's desk and looked at it like it had disappointed him. "I didn't understand what we were signing," he said. "The co-applicant form. I let your mother handle the numbers." My mother made a sound. "I always let her handle the numbers," my father continued, quieter. "That's not an excuse." "I know it's not." Derek looked at both of them with the expression of a man discovering that the floor of his childhood home was not the material he'd always assumed. His fiancée was outside, probably wondering what was happening. His business partner was standing against the wall with the controlled breathing of someone running calculations about professional consequences. His parents had just admitted, obliquely, to misrepresenting a federal document on his behalf. "Did you know," Derek said to them, not asking whether they'd done it, "that was established that this could affect the approval, that it could make everything worse?" "We were helping," my mother said. "You were helping yourselves feel useful," Derek replied, with a gentleness that was somehow sharper than anger. "There's a difference." I recognized that sentence. I had lived inside that distinction for a decade. My mother looked at Derek, then at me, and for a moment her expression did something I hadn't seen it do in so long I'd stopped expecting it. It loosened. The management of it fell away briefly, and what was underneath was just a tired woman in a room where her certainties had stopped working. "I didn't think it mattered that much," she said, and I believed her, which was almost worse than if she'd been calculating about it. "You've always made everything matter so much." "Things matter," I said. "That's not a personality flaw." She looked at me steadily. "No," she said at last. "I suppose it isn't." Nobody spoke for a while after that. Marcus pushed off the wall and said, quietly, that he was going to step out and check on the guests. He looked at me once on his way to the door, not with fear anymore, something more like respect, or at least its early possibility. He closed the door behind him. My father picked up his drink again and set it back down without drinking from it. He was doing the thing he'd always done in moments of accountability, hovering in the vicinity of an apology without quite landing it, like a plane circling an airport it wasn't sure had clearance. "I know I wasn't what you needed," he said finally. "When you were 18. I know I took the easy answer." "You took her answer," I said. He flinched slightly. "Yes, that's not a small thing. No, she was wrong. But you knew the tuition bill was real. You chose anyway." "Yes," he said again. The word cost him something. I watched it. My mother sat down in the chair Derek had vacated. She sat the way people sit when the party is finally, irrefutably over. "What happens now?" she said. "With the application?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's not mine anymore. But if the discrepancy—" "Mom." Derek's voice was quiet and final. "Stop." She looked at her son. "Whatever happens with the loan," Derek said, "we'll handle it. Legitimately." He glanced at me. "Can they amend the documentation? Correct the figures?" "They should talk to the reviewer directly," I said. "Voluntary correction before a finding is treated very differently than discovery after." I paused. "That's public information, not advice from me." Derek nodded. He pulled out his phone and made a note, and watching him do it the practical, methodical way he responded to a problem, I saw something I'd missed in years of loose contact. My brother was actually quite good at his work. He'd built a real thing, and he hadn't done it entirely on my parents' money, or at least not only that. He'd done it with years of early mornings and cold weather and clients who needed something done correctly and on time. I respected that. I wanted to say so. I almost didn't, because it felt like opening something I wasn't sure either of us were ready to hold. But I had driven 4 hours, and I was tired of only saying the things that felt safe. "Your company is real," I said to him. "Whatever happens with the application, you built something real. That matters." Derek looked at me. Something shifted in his expression, not quite gratitude, something more complicated and more genuine than gratitude. "You kept an eye on it," he said. "Didn't you? Over the years." I hadn't expected that question. "Occasionally," I admitted. The website. Trade registrations, public filings, checking in from a distance. He wasn't accusing me. He was just reading the situation clearly, which I'd forgotten he could do when emotion wasn't in the way. "I didn't know how to be in contact," I said, after a while. "Neither did I," he said. My mother made a small sound. I looked at her and found something I hadn't anticipated. She was crying. Not dramatically. Not the kind of crying designed to redirect a room. Just quietly, in the way of someone who has arrived somewhere they can't argue their way out of. I didn't move toward her. But I didn't look away either. "I thought we were doing right by you," she said. "Teaching you to stand on your own. You were doing right by yourselves," I said, not harshly. "That's not the same thing, but I think you've known that for a while." She pressed her fingers below her eyes. Said nothing. "I'm not here to take anything apart," I told her. I recused myself so no one could ever say I influenced Derek's outcome in either direction. I came because Rachel asked. And because I stopped. "Because why?" my mother said. I thought about it honestly. Because I got tired of being the only one who knew what my life actually looked like. That landed the way true things do, without drama, without argument. My father reached over and put his hand on my mother's shoulder. She let him. It was the most human I'd seen them be together in years. Derek stood near the door, letting the room settle. His party was still happening outside, his fiancée was still there, and his employees, and all the evidence of the thing he'd built. He looked at me with the expression of someone mapping a road he'd thought was closed. "Can I call you?" he said. "Going forward. Just call." "Yes," I said. "And you'll answer." "I'll answer." He nodded, slow and deliberate. Then he opened the office door, and the sound of the party came back in all at once, voices and music, and the ordinary warmth of people who didn't know any of this had happened. He held the door for me. I walked out first. The loan review concluded 6 weeks later. The amended documentation my parents submitted voluntarily after my parents met with the assigned reviewer and a compliance attorney resulted in a revised application with corrected income figures. The loan was approved at a lower amount than originally requested, with adjusted terms. Derek told me this in a phone call that lasted 40 minutes, which was 37 minutes longer than any call we'd had in the previous 5 years. He didn't thank me, since he wasn't sure what he was thanking me for, and I respected that he knew the difference. My mother called 3 months after the party. She spoke carefully, in the measured tone of someone who has spent time with a therapist or a very honest friend. "I want to understand your work better," she said. I almost said something dismissive. I didn't. "It's compliance and oversight," I told her. "We make sure federal resources go where they're supposed to go. And you're good at it." "Yes." A pause. "I wasted a lot of years being proud of the wrong things," she said. "About Derek's success, about the business. I told that story to everyone. I never told anyone about you." "I know. I'd like to change that," she said. "If you'll let me." I held the phone and looked out my apartment window at the parking lot below and the specific gray of an Ohio afternoon that had been promising to rain since morning. I had spent a long time imagining what I would feel if she ever said something close to this. I had assumed it would feel like winning. It didn't feel like anything that clean. It felt like a door that had been jammed for years, giving slightly when pushed. Not open yet, but giving. "Tell me about something you're proud of," she said. "In your work. Tell me one thing." I thought about it. Then I told her about a case from my second year, a veteran-owned business that had been denied funding due to a clerical error in their documentation. I'd caught it in routine review, flagged the error, walked the case through correction. The business had received their loan 4 months later. My name was never on anything the business owner saw. My mother was quiet when I finished. "You did that," she said. "That's the job. But you did it." "Yes," I said. "I did it." People sometimes ask whether it was worth it, the distance, the years of silence, the 4-hour drive to a party where my mother told 30 strangers I pushed paper. I never know how to answer that, because it assumes the alternative was better. It assumes that staying close, staying quiet, eating dinner at their table while my brother got everything and I got lessons about independence, it assumes that version of my life would have produced the same person I am now. It wouldn't have. I know it wouldn't have. What I built, I built because they didn't help me. There's an almost unbearable irony in that, and I've stopped trying to resolve it into something cleaner. Derek got married in September of the following year. Small ceremony. Rachel's parents flew in from Portland. My parents were there, older and somehow less certain than they'd ever been when certainty was all they offered me. I stood next to Derek during the photographs because he asked me to. His arm around my shoulders felt like an apology neither of us needed to say out loud anymore. In the picture, we're both laughing at something Rachel's father said just before the shutter clicked. I don't look like someone who drove 4 hours to correct the record. I look like someone's sister, which, it turns out, I had been the whole time. Some doors don't open because people on the other side have a change of heart. They open because you stop waiting for permission and push. I pushed. And finally, quietly, slowly, in the way of things that take the exact amount of time they need it gave. If this story stayed with you, let it sit for a moment. Think about the difference between what people say they're doing for you and what the paperwork actually shows. Think about the cost of silence and the strange, specific power of refusing to disappear. If you believe stories like this matter, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about accountability, distance, and the long road back to something real, stay with us.